What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and I build systems that remove bottlenecks within businesses. And I've been documenting my builds since the 1st of June 2025, going all the way up to the 1st of June 2026. And in today's video, I'm going to be telling you or talking to you about how I got a concussion and what that ultimately taught me about perseverance. So, back in the day, a very long time ago, I used to play rugby or, football to all my American viewers. I used to, I used to play sports, back in the day. And, in the beginning, when I started, I was not good at all. I basically could not even throw the ball properly. And, I was back in primary school, and I basically could not, throw the ball or like spin the ball as you will properly. And I got into it because, I saw my friends, saying, hey, I want to play rugby, and we were all playing rugby. And because my friends were doing it, I ultimately just wanted to play sports as well at the same time. But then, as time went on, I ultimately started, realizing that, hey, this is something that I thoroughly do enjoy, but it was something I was never truly good at. And over time, I realized that, if this is the thing that I ultimately, enjoy, I want to become so much better at it and ultimately learn so that I could get into the first team and not, be on the bench. And that was something that, for me, was super important. And because of my age and my birthday being later on in the year, I had to go play in high school, when I was still in primary school, or the foundation phase, or the just before high school. Basically, I had to go all the way to high school in order to just get to play because of that factor. And it was pretty tough, being the youngest person that was there, in this big world, with everyone that's like 2 3 times bigger than you. And you realize that wow, like I'm in this environment where I feel like I don't belong. But ultimately, after some time, you realize that you start getting used to it. And I thoroughly enjoyed rugby to that point where I wanted to play with the guys that were in high school, but I was still somewhat in primary school. So when I joined the team, I was somewhat of the smallest guy on the team. And one of the things that I somewhat learned, or was able to do or translate from the time that I was playing in the beginning, from primary school all the way to high school, was that I was the person that wouldn't be afraid to tackle the biggest guys, the guys 2 3 times my size. And that that one thing alone ultimately got me to playing in the first team. And by no means I was somewhat decent, but having that that approach of saying, hey, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm ultimately gonna be in this big environment, and I'm gonna own up to it in my own specific way, even though at the time I didn't fully understand it. That, hey, I could be, this small guy that's playing with all these guys that are 2 3 times bigger than me, but ultimately at the same time, I can also, somewhat tackle them and play with the team because the skills matter the most. And I think this is one of the most important concepts that I want to tie into this video, that it ultimately doesn't matter like where you're at, or if you're in this arena where you feel like, hey, everyone else has it all figured out and they're super super good. You can basically work your way up there and ultimately get to play at that level. Like for me, for example. And how it ultimately happened was, now I got into the first team simply because I was there, every practice session I was there, every meeting I was literally there. Even though I was still back in primary school, I always made the commitment to ultimately show up in the high school environment, such so that I could just play rugby. And that was the one thing that I really really enjoyed at the time. And from that, I ultimately got you'd say drafted if it's football in America, but I got called up to basically play at this tournament that happens on a yearly basis, where like all of the schools in the in the area, in the basically in the town, basically, if you say, or in the province, basically come together, and they basically play a tournament, and a few people from that tournament get selected to ultimately go on to play for the league or the capital. I'm not 100% sure how to properly phrase it, but essentially I went to this tournament, and from that tournament I was just super excited to be there. I didn't even think I was going to play. I was just excited to, be part of the team, because like I said, I was the smallest guy on the team that, was coming to high school and just playing the game and not really fully understanding how things fully worked. But from that, I showed up anyways. I came to this tournament and, I was playing my first game. This is my first game. I'm starting my first game and I'm like super excited that hey, this is going to be one of the most, exciting times that I'm going to enjoy this game thoroughly and I'm ultimately just going to have so much fun. And then the game starts. I started the game, and then the first kick of the match happens, and then I don't remember anything. I don't remember anything that happened. I think I got concussed within the first tackle, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, to be fair, the guy was like three times my size. Like I don't blame it. I don't blame it. Looking back, I don't blame it. But I just look back on that and I just laugh and I'm like, hey, I was a little bit, didn't care, in terms of just showing up no matter what and just persevering through that. And then through that, I ultimately, got a concussion and somehow, some way, I ultimately finished the game. And no one really realized I had a concussion until the point where like someone found or they noticed that, hey, I'm not acting like myself. And then I basically went back to the hospital to get a scan and things like that. And then ultimately that happened. But then now from that, because I enjoyed it so much, and then my parents said, I'm not gonna ultimately play rugby anymore, and that really put a stop to my dreams in terms of what it is that I really enjoyed doing at the time. It was from my perspective, I was the smallest guy in the team, and I just wanted to somewhat just play the thing that I ultimately enjoyed, and through that ultimately was the thing that I found joy in at the time, and that was the motivating factor that hey, even though I got this concussion, even though my parents may say I may not be able to play this specific sport, I'm just gonna do it anyways, and I'm just gonna somewhat figure it out and ultimately play. So I didn't play for I was supposed to be out for the entire season, but then I ultimately took 3 weeks, no playing, nothing at all, and I came back. I came back and I don't know, maybe the coach saw something within me, and he made me captain just simply just from coming back from that and just playing as well, because I was never the type of person that would be afraid of a challenge. And I think it's still pretty evident today that it's always good to be up for a challenge and ultimately push your mind to its breaking point, and then once you reach that point, you realize that you can push it even further, and just persevering through those times and ultimately pushing through, because that ultimately allows you to then reshape or shed yourself in order to reach the new level. And at the time I didn't fully understand it, in terms of understanding that, having that fearless, courageous, whatever you call it, in terms of I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what it's gonna take. I'm just gonna build it anyways, and I'm just gonna do it no matter what, simply because I believe in myself so much. Even if at the time I was the smallest guy and everyone was 2 3 times my size, I still believed that I was gonna do it no matter what. And I think this is something that still is still present within me today. That I just believe that I'm gonna do it no matter what, and I don't always have to have the right or the perfect answers, but I know that just through action and just taking those steps of just doing it, you ultimately find the answers that you're seeking. But it ultimately comes as a result of somewhat being borderline insane, to think that hey, I'm so much smaller than this person, but I'm still gonna tackle them, and I'm still gonna help the team to get that win. It ultimately means that something, there's a fire within you, and it's just about making sure that you're building on top of that, and that you're constantly just building and making sure that no matter what, you believe in yourself and you bet on yourself more than anything else. Because I could have quit. I could have said, hey, I have a concussion, let me never play rugby ever again, and let me not do anything of that nature again. But I said no. I wanted to finish what I started, simply because I made a commitment at that time to myself that I was gonna play and I was gonna make sure that I do the best that I possibly can and have no unfinished business when I'm done playing at the time. And I made sure that each and every single day I use that time to sharpen my skills and ultimately, become better. And through that, I became captain. I slowly became captain. The youngest, or maybe not the youngest, but like the smallest guy on the team somehow, becomes captain of the rugby team. It's so insane to look back and think about. But then, tying it back to how things are today, it makes me realize that there are certain principles from that you can ultimately take that, can push you and understand as well in order to build whatever it is that you're building as well. And also me, what are the lessons and principles that I can take from that I can ultimately translate into the things that I'm doing on a day to day, and sticking true to myself that, hey, if I was able to face that and, be somewhat insane enough to think that, I could tackle a guy that is 2, 3 times my size and still, come out on top, then let me do it. I'm gonna do it no matter what, because I believe in myself and I believe in what it is that we're building to that point, that nothing is ever gonna, stop me or deter me from making sure that we get to that end point, and also taking the lessons and just learning each and every single day. I think that is equally as important. And if I want anything, you guys to take anything from this, or even my future self to take anything from this into the future, is just always remember, the kid version of yourself that you ultimately were listening to at that time, that told you, hey, this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it to the max. I mean, for me, it worked out. I finished the season and I got the biggest award, or something that I never really truly expected at the time, which was to become captain. And it was pretty fun. It was a pretty fun experience. And if I were to say, would I go back and do it again? Of course I would. I would definitely get that concussion, because it ultimately shaped the story and also who I am today. And it's all just about building that future and making sure that each and every single day you remember that kid version of yourself that just never gives up, and make sure that, hey, each and every single day you're building not just for yourself today, but for yourself into the future, and making your future self proud. And that is ultimately priceless. It's no amount of money could ever compare to that. And if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to check out my newsletter. It's the first link in the description. And if you want to connect with me, also in the description. And I will see you guys in the next video.